on this computer.
Hello, Eric.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me.
My pleasure.
We're happy to announce that you are one of our first nominees for an honorary membership into the California Sinsemilla Growers Association. Our honorary members are, thank you. Honorary members are leaders of industry, OGs, and plant scientists, and all those who can add value to the Growers Association through their experience and their wisdom. And you encompass at least two of those three. As an OG and a professional in industry, you and I have worked together before through clones, through your role at Dark Heart, and also we kept in touch through PCG. So with that, I'd like to ask you a couple things about your relationship to cannabis and the industry, and maybe some advice.
Sure.
Would you be willing to answer this for our aspiring young growers and cultivators?
Able and willing to share any and everything that might help provide value and move your movement forward.
Thank you, sir. The first question is, describe your relationship with cannabis. And this can be from start till how you ended up where you're at now, or however you like to share.
Sure. Yeah, my relationship with cannabis is, part record collector orientation with respect to seeds and archiving seeds, part life coach, part doctor, part psychotherapist, part industrialist. I mean, I've just going all the way back. When I was in high school, my friends and I read The Emperor Wears No Clothes by Jack Herrera and got wise to the fact that the government had not necessarily been telling us the truth about cannabis. And so that meant a number of different things, right? Like that meant that the DARE program was not absolutely 100% true. It wasn't infallible, that crack cocaine and heroin and cannabis were exactly the same thing and would lead to the same places from a life output and outcome standpoint if you were to embrace any one of the above. And then simultaneously that, hemp had been legal and utilized across the world, up and through the American Revolution, and that there was even tax penalties for not growing it. So all of a sudden we're going, wait a minute, so the American government would actually penalize farmers, not tax subsidies, they would penalize them for not growing hemp for the war effort. And then, all the things you just read these, we all have seen this before about George Washington's diary and separating the males from the females. And so, that just got us really fired. We were rambunctious teenagers, and that got us all kinds of fired up about this being a cause. And at the same time, we were really not, I was not a big drinker. I didn't get into scotch until probably my mid 20s. Even beer, I was only into craft stuff. I never did the Natty Light, Miller Lite, Coors thing, and I just didn't do it. And then I got turned on to craft beer, and that was sort of like my baseline. And so we were going to hemp rallies in high school. We were going and participating in those. I actually met Jack Herrera and got to smoke a joint of Jack Herrera with him at one of these. Right. So picture this. So my friends and I are with Jack. We're meeting him. It's like a moment of great joy in and of itself. And then someone comes running up and they're like, Jack, I've got it. And it was the year that Sensi had released Jack Herrera, maybe the year after, and the first batch was done. And so they're like, want to spark one up? So winds up getting passed around. So we're then smoking Jack Herrera with Jack Herrera. I wish I could go back and relive that moment, just because you don't realize how special it is when you're a kid at 17 years old. But that was part of it. We were obsessively committed to having the best cannabis in California. In SoCal, we lived in Orange County, so we grew up in the suburbs. And the reason why we were so obsessed is that we got spoiled on Cannabis Cup winners from the 90s, because my buddy's older brother was growing Skunk One, Northern Lights 5 Haze, Silver Pearl, Early Girl, Hawaiian Indica, Hindu Kush, not to be confused with OG Kush. And so we got probably an ounce of each. And so for a group of 4 or 5 guys, I mean, that's a lot of sampling and getting to know and getting familiar with what are really now the cornerstones and building blocks of so many of, I mean, basically everything that we have today. So that, and it was grown impeccably. Like it was grown just, I mean, it was remarkably grown. And so it just set the standard really high for, it's like your first time ever drinking alcohol, you're going to have Macallan 30. It's like, it's hard to, you know what I mean? Like that's what you base everything off of. That's what you judge everything off of. So we were very self-admittedly cannabis geeks and snobs. And, you know, we went to Amsterdam after high school, and you'll love this one, Ryan. So we convinced our parents to let us go on a Europe trip. And we did. And my buddy Chris put together a whole itinerary. The itinerary was like 17 pages long, stuffed full of all these activities, hour by hour. We're going to go to France and Germany and Holland and Italy. But like really, we were spending 2/3 of the trip in Amsterdam. And it was like a sales pitch. It was like my first presentation deck, you know, from a sales and biz dev standpoint. My parents were into it. Like we got to go. So as research for that trip, we had many archived issues of High Times. So we went back and pulled out the Cannabis Cup issues of High Times for like the last 5 years, and we took a map of Amsterdam and looked at the winning strains from each of the coffee shops for each year, and put a pin in the map with a little post-it note. So we had a whole game plan for like what we wanted to sample from which coffee shop based on what awards things had won. So the geekiness, yeah, carried over to that. So AK-47 from the gray area and Super Silver Haze from the greenhouse, which is still the best cut of that I've ever seen, Super Silver Haze. And so that was kind of that was the genesis of my relationship with cannabis. And also, you know, it had become legal in 95 or 96 in California. And I saw that in the newspaper, and I was like, Mom and Dad, it's happening. And they're like, no, it's not. I'm like, would you stop talking about it? And I'm like, no, I will not stop talking about it. And, you know, I, of course, you know, didn't shut up about it. And now it's like, I'm like, Mom and Dad, guess what? I was right. And so so that's sort of chapter 1. Chapter 2 is I went to college, got my MBA from USC for grad school. So I took a traditional route, worked at Adobe, worked at Omnicom, did the Fortune 500, 200, 100 deal. And then I was, totally knee deep in corporate America. I was at Adobe, surprise. I was at Adobe, and the coolest thing about working at Adobe for me was being at cocktail parties telling people that I worked at Adobe. It was just not like, I'm not meant to be in a big organization like that. And I was successful, but I wasn't enjoying it. Like I wasn't having a good one. Like it was, from my parents' perspective, it was like the pinnacle achievement of my professional career. But, you know, my stomach said something different when I was waking up in the morning, dreading the meetings and like the pressure and the stress, and just like the not having a connection to the core reason of why I'm doing this from a life's purpose standpoint. So at the same time, my wife, who's immunocompromised, she has lupus, had been taking cannabis oil for a little while. My buddy and I had started growing together, just hobbyist, and he was actually one of the friends that I went to Amsterdam with. So like it was a really cool way to reconnect. And so now we were growies, and like we sourced seeds from Mr. Nice in Switzerland, and it was we were growing seemingly all the stuff that we had wanted to, you know, be smoking for years, and just couldn't find it because it's older heirloom stuff, older heirloom cultivars. And so my buddy made, it wasn't RSO, but it was some type of ethanol extraction, and he gave me some oil. I started putting on a cracker every day for her, and we saw her blood work get better by the numbers. So dsDNA is one of the lupus markers. We saw that and other things start to trend better. And at the same time as those were getting better, her usage of opioids for pain medication, Vicodin, and also muscle relaxers for joint and muscle pain was going down, because we were able to use cannabis in 2 different ways. One was preventatively, which works well for migraines, and one was acutely. Very few medications you can use for both. It's usually about preventative purposes, or it's about like I'm having a freaking panic attack. Give me a Xanax now. It's not, you know. So there's anti-anxiety medication that you take that like you've got to take for a while. It builds up in the system. But Xanax is not like that. Xanax is immediate, comes on quickly, leaves quickly. But cannabis is a medication that you can use for both. You can self-medicate in both ways. So I had a meeting with Mary Jane while I was at Adobe, and I felt more connected to the clients than the company that I was working for at the time, and kind of wishing like if I could only be on the other side of this table working in the cannabis industry. Like how cool would that be? And so my wife, God bless her, was like, "You got to quit. Time to quit. You're quitting." And I'm like, "Adobe? Yes. Why? Because you got to get a cannabis. Time for you to shift gears and go like pursue your life's vision, passion, dream, mission. And at least this way, you will get paid to talk about what you won't shut up about anyway, and other people will have to listen to you, and you'll make money doing it, right?" So that was the beginning. That was the end of chapter 2, I'll say. And then I did. I found a home in cannabis. I worked for some ancillary companies, publisher, and a technology company, then landed where you and I first met at Dark Heart Nursery, and then Purple City Genetics. And those were amazing gigs, man. Being able to consult with farmers and being able to leverage everything that I know and learned about cultivars, and with respect to use cases, and making consultative suggestions around cultivars they would want to grow based on consumer preferences and what we knew about the marketplace, and also use cases and growing environments and indoor outdoor greenhouse. And are you growing, and this really got into PCG much more than Dark Art, but what are you growing for? What are your goals? And what XYZ parameters are you growing within? And then let's talk about what we're seeing from a trend standpoint, the qualitative aspect of what consumers are into on the flower and hash fronts. And then let's make some recommendations for you. And that could be, you should grow these strains for your 5,000 foot grow indoor because you'll maximize your price per pound based on the fact that those strains are really in demand right now. Or it could be, you're growing outdoors and you've never grown auto flowering varieties before, and PCG is crushing it on the auto flowering breeding. Like, why don't you run an experiment this year and test whether or not a bumper crop, meaning an early crop of autos before you would plant full season, like in the early spring, and then a bumper crop on the back end post harvest in parts of California where the weather was warm enough. Like, let's test whether or not that would be a viable use of resources, because you already have the land, you're already paying taxes. If it's not being used, you're not making money off of it. So like, why don't we test to see if you can grow some autos, either for maybe not the top shelf flower, or maybe for fresh frozen. And so just working with farmers on that front from a business consulting standpoint was just like amazingly fun. So that was really chapter 3. And then we relocated from LA to St. Louis. And it just didn't make sense to continue at Purple City. So I started working for the coolest company that's in strategic hiring today that's playing in cannabis, called Force Brands. And so now I'm getting to leverage all of Force Brands' experience with guiding companies, setting strategy, kind of similar thing to what I was doing for farmers. But they've been doing this with traditional CPG lanes, consumer packaged good lanes, like wine, spirits, beer, non-alcoholic beverage, food, beauty, pet, health and wellness. Cannabis was an obvious next lane to go into from a vertical perspective because of all the similarities between the regulated industry of alcohol and wine and beer, and what we're seeing in cannabis today. And there's always I've got to give the caveat, there's always going to be a balance of legacy talent and expertise from before with what companies need to be at a scale to get from 0 to 15 miles an hour is one thing, but to get from 15 to 30 or 30 to 45, to go from $5 million to $10 million in a year in revenue, or 10 to 25, 25 to 50, it just requires a different set of talent from a caliber perspective. And as companies become more and more successful, that becomes more and more of a sort of a universal need. And what I identified was that all cannabis companies today are going to be in need of the type of guidance that Force Brands has been giving companies in the outside world, if you call it, for years and years and years. And that ranges from companies that are pre and post acquisition that are now part of, Fortune 500, 200, and 100 organizations. But they started as scrappy startups, and we grew with them. So we saw what worked, saw what didn't. So being able to bring that sort of expertise into cannabis, as well as the big business stuff, working with the Heinekens and the Procter and Gamble's of the world, also applicable for the MSOs, right? So my hypothesis was that every cannabis company today that's successful is going to be in net new territory of altitude, because they've never been here before, because the industry is so new, and they therefore will need two things. One is access to talent they don't otherwise have, and the second is business consulting that they probably didn't know existed and was available to them, in concert with the people that can give them the talent to be able to execute on those strategies. So that's sort of part 4 of the act. And along the way, my seed collection, I just have to add, has been like an amazing resource for me being able to play both sides of the fence, to be able to showcase that I'm one of you, if I'm talking with a farmer or a breeder, someone that's coming from legacy. And that's amazing for just creating trust and bonding and rapport, and knowing they've got someone on this side that gets them, while simultaneously being able to set strategy with maybe the folks that got their MBAs from Harvard, or that came from PepsiCo, or whatever it is. So I feel like most people in this space are really strong on the cannabis acumen front. They know a lot about herb, or they're really strong on the business front, know a lot about business because that's their background. I've met very few people that have kind of an equal bench strength on both. And good, bad, right, or wrong, I've been blessed with the life experience that's really given me both. And working in this industry, especially at Force Brands now, is kind of like a right person, right place, right time kind of thing.
Oh wow, man! I'm so glad to hear that it's going good for you, and to see you. You're definitely an OG, but you've got both. And coming from someone who's been accused of a similar thing, except for commercial ag and science, to cannabis, I can truly appreciate your skill set. And I'd say that Force Brands and cannabis industry is lucky to have you. And you talked a little bit about kind of where with Force Brands, how you kind of see the industry developing. Where do you see the industry as a whole moving? You could use California or the US as your example, versus where would it go in your perfect world, your cannabis utopia? Kind of a little bit of compare and contrast.
Sure. Repeat the question one more time.
So where do you see this cannabis industry headed versus where ideally you would see it headed, is a better summary of the question.
So I think that where it's headed is going to be like many other industries, basically any other net new industry. And that's that things start out very fragmented. There's not a whole lot of standardization. There's a lot of small and medium-sized players, and alliances don't yet exist. And so as things mature, consolidation happens, standards emerge, lots of acquisitions happen on the M&A front. There become less and less players across the board, and real brands start to emerge from a household name standpoint. That's just not possible when the market is so fragmented. So I think that'll happen. That's already starting to happen. I mean, we're seeing it with the Curaleaf and Columbia acquisition. I tip my hat to those guys. That's amazing. It's going to give Curaleaf like insane reach into retail, and so I see there's a couple things that I'm seeing now. One is that, which is to be expected, and the second is companies that are scrappier startups that are the rising tide companies are doing well are either doing well because they've raised funds, they raised some money, and or it's not mutually exclusive, or they've just bootstrapped and done really, really well. And the common theme that I see there across the board is an increasing need for operational layers. And what I mean by that is that a typical startup that has grown beyond just a startup mode is usually owner operated. So the owner's still very much involved. A lot of the key players in the beginning are still very much involved. there's a breaking point where they just get to a point where they're like, I have too many direct reports. Like I have too many people that are reporting to me. I need literally an operational layer between me and them that can help with the day-to-day operation, so I can focus on the things that I need to be focusing on, which is building strategic alliances, raising money, doing things on the PR front. Those high-level strategic things for C-suite are difficult when they're still managing the granular and the tactical on the day-to-day. So there's another reason why operational layers are more important than ever, and that's that supply chain crunches um, from uh, from COVID are resulting in everyone's looking for operational expertise. I mean, things spiked during COVID from a certain degree. People were out shopping, so like that was really busy. People were keeping themselves busy, keeping themselves sane, whether it's ordering online or going in store. Um, Buying boomed. People were at home consumers. So the talent for things like digital marketers and other operational digital marketers arguably is not inside of operations typically, but in the world of ecom, I would say it is, because they do help. They do help the velocity of getting things from point A to point B at the end of the supply chain standpoint. So there's an increase for demand and the same amount of talent. So those people are harder to come by. So that's put operational folks in more and more demand. And the second is that you just have to learn to do more with less because of the supply chain hiccups from COVID. So you have potentially less things coming out of the international factory, if you will. Yet you have an increased demand in the States. So you have to have people that know how to do more with less and to be that much more efficient. So I think that, and that's going to be true. That's true not just for the scrappy startups that are growing, but also for the MSOs as well. Coupled with the fact that larger companies that raised capital earlier on hired in certain ways that may or may not have worked for them then, and it may or may not be working for them now. And so they're looking to import maybe the right kind of talent, and maybe it was the right kind of talent when they did it a year or two ago, but not necessarily for right now. So from an organizational just development and trend standpoint, those are things that I'm seeing. Now, what I would like to see across the board is tighter controls around basic things like lab results. You've got flour that's testing in the 40% range and cold water hash that's testing in low 50s. So like, at what point do you look at a nug of herb and a ball of hash and say these two things are not the same when they both have the same THC percentage? Like, because if the trend continues like that's what's going to happen. You're going to have an herb that's testing higher than hash, and that's just like that's just doesn't work. That's like that breaks it. There's an immutable law of reality called gravity, and it doesn't break gravity, but it's sort of in the same direction. Like it can't coexist. So I think that lab testing is going to become more and more. I would like to see that level up. I would like to see tighter controls and differentiation around medical testing as opposed to recreational testing level up, because people that are immunocompromised might not be able to tolerate things like the normal consumer can, even if it's safe. I would like to see things like blockchain oriented chain of custody to be able to connect not just seed to sale, but like breeder to consumer. So like when you and I are buying an eighth of fill in the blank cultivar, and we know, or legend holds it, or whatever it is, that entity X was the breeder, like there has to be a chain of custody with some integrity attached to cultivars. Now the IP around that and how to deal with patent protection, and like at what point do you say like, okay, this is public domain? Is it a land race? Is it skunk one? In the is it at what point in the land race, heirloom, hybrid, and then polyhybrid, arguably hybrids and heirloom are one and the same, but like at what point does the line in the sand get drawn and say, okay, from here on out royalties can exist? So yeah, I think that evolution on that front will be super interesting. Those are some of the things that I think about in terms of industry evolution and where I want to see things going.
Fascinating, man. Thank you for sharing that. Lastly here, one more question. What advice would you give to young aspiring growers or folks that simply want to take that leap that you did in your chapter 3 and join the cannabis industry?
Sure. So I would say for growers, these are two very different questions, but I'm going to answer both of them. For growers, nail it and then scale it. Become a master at your domain in the smallest possible XYZ access you can, and understand that even though you'll scale and the rules will change a little bit, meaning you go from quantum physics to atomic physics, the rules of nature kind of change. It's not that drastic, but like dealing with things like airflow across, a 30,000 square foot building or room is very different. There's just different dynamics that show up and things that you need to be aware of from an above canopy and below canopy standpoint. And I'm not a master grower. I'm just sharing what I've learned from other people. So nail it and then scale it. When you scale it, be sure that you are onboarding people that have seen this movie before, that have done this before. And trust, but verify, and more verify than trust, because plenty of people will say they can do certain things. But just like anything else, you want to make sure that you, as you're scaling, you've got the right talent in place to be able to do it. And that's going to be applicable for everything, not just cultivation. For people that are looking to get into the industry, recognize that it is a turbulent journey. It is a rocky road. It is not a linear path. You will not go from point A to point B using a ruler. And because of this, and also because of the fact that the velocity of the industry is like dog years, like it's 1 year in cannabis is like 7 out in the normal world. And if you're lucky with the same amount of gray hair, usually it's more. So it's like this, be clear, as Simon Sinek would say, on your why. Be ultra clear on your why and why this is important to you and why this is sort of the only option for you. Make sure it's coming from a place of true choice, that it's not like this is the best of two possible alternatives, but like this is the only thing that I want to do to the exclusion of everything else because of this. Be connected to the plant, whatever that means for you, in a way that will keep you inspired and give you the fortitude to push on when things get tough, and they will get tough in unique and novel ways you've never seen before. You've got two things on the X and Y axis. You've got your skills and what you know how to do, and then you've got the industry that you work in. So if you're going to make a shift and get into cannabis, you're making a shift on, we'll call it the Y axis. So it's really difficult to pick up multiple learning curves at the same time. You're going to have that in cannabis regardless of if you're doing the exact same role or not. Meaning just in the cannabis industry in and of itself just has so many interesting nuances to it. I mean, yes, strip away the sexiness. It is a consumer packaged good that is the result of an agricultural product. And that's no different than, the phone that I just bought yesterday, at the Apple store. But there's also a lot of distinctions. So I would say pick what you are really good at and that you enjoy doing, that you could do in your sleep if you were to get poached to go to a competitor. Find a home for yourself within the cannabis space that will take advantage of that so that your role is taken care of. And you might have to learn some nuances that have to deal with compliance, if you're into marketing or cultivation or distribution, like that, there's going to be some things that are different. But make your life easy. Make it as easy as possible. And don't try to change both what you're doing and also the industry that you're doing it in at the same time. If you want to do something different, get into cannabis first, just get your sea legs, and then a couple years down the road, maybe explore doing something different. But the industry needs specific specialized talent right now. And chances are at this point in your career, whoever you are, you have that. So like leverage that and find a company that is in need of that, that's able and willing to pay for it. And then that way you maximize your probabilities of success moving into the cannabis industry.
Excellent, man. Well, kind sir, I thank you so much for taking the time and for sharing your advice to help growers and individuals nail and scale, and appreciate your input as we continue to help connect people to the plant as our mission and our why at the California Cannabis team. God
It's been a
bless.
pleasure. Thank you so much, Ryan.
Great answers. Thanks, man. I really appreciate it.
Here, I'm gonna